Welcome to VERITAS. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss our latest episodes. Please like this video, comment below with your thoughts, and share it with others seeking truth. For more exclusive content and to support our mission, visit VERITAS7.com.
The questions you always had. The answers you were never given. The place to seek the truth. Welcome to VERITAS.
Tonight on VERITAS, our special guest is Michael Cremo. For decades, Michael Cremo has challenged the foundations of science. Known as the forbidden archaeologist, his work has sparked debate, controversy, and fascination. His book, Forbidden Archaeology, questioned the belief that humans have only been present for a short span of time. Now, after years of investigation and discovery, Michael presents his newest research in extreme human antiquity. The book reveals startling evidence of human remains, artifacts, and footprints that reach far beyond accepted timelines. Some cases point not to thousands of years, but to millions and even hundreds of millions. If this evidence is genuine, it changes everything we have been taught about history. Why then is it so little known? Has science ignored it, dismissed it, or even concealed it? Michael Cremo believes much of what we call scientific consensus is shaped by what he calls knowledge filtration. This is the quiet process where discoveries that do not fit the standard picture are pushed aside. His work asks us to reconsider not only where we came from, but how long we have been here. Cremo also draws from the Vedic tradition, blending his research with spiritual insights. What if humanity has always been here? What if consciousness itself is far older than materialist science allows? Tonight, we enter a journey into forbidden discoveries, suppressed evidence, and the possibility that our story is far older than we have ever imagined. Michael Cremo is coming up next. Welcome to VERITAS. If this is your first time listening, welcome home. To access tonight's full interview and all of our exclusive material, simply join the VERITAS Plus family by clicking on the subscribe button at VERITAS7.com. While you're there, don't forget to visit the VERITAS store, featuring a range of great products, including Focus Life Force Energy. Experience the benefits with a 15-day free trial of FLFE, no credit card required. Also, be sure to explore our enhanced VERITAS Plus transcripts, offering full transcripts, comprehensive analysis, and exclusive insights for every episode. As a VERITAS Plus member, you'll receive a 50% discount on these enhanced transcripts. Want to get in touch? Be a guest on the program? Suggest someone or share feedback? Just click the contact button at VERITAS7.com. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's program. His latest book is Extreme Human Antiquity, Further Investigations into Forbidden Archaeology. His website is extremehumanantiquity.com, and directly from Los Angeles, California, I'd like to welcome the forbidden archaeologist himself, Michael Cremo, back after 15 years. Hello, Michael, and welcome back to VERITAS.
Been an extremely long time since we've spoken.
It has been, but I've been following your work, and your work is more timely now than ever before, Michael. Have you seen how many people are waking up to the fact that our history has been hidden from us, not by thousands, but maybe millions of years?
Absolutely. I think that's a possibility that really has to be seriously considered based on the evidence.
And by the way, it's been, as I said, 15 years, and you last joined me in 2010, but the next year, I was at the Sedona at a conference. I met you, Graham Hancock, and many other luminaries. And I always think back at that gathering, Michael, because it was a room full of people challenging the accepted story of our past. But there was one story that always stayed with me, and if you could, I want you to repeat it on this program tonight. It was your trip to Russia. You were invited by, I believe, a Russian university, and just before the event was to start, it was canceled. Can you tell us more of that story again, so those who don't know who you are?
Yeah, that was interesting. My books have been published in now about 25 or 26 languages. and one of them was Russia. And in those days, like you were saying, it was quite a few years ago, relations between our countries were a little more peaceful than they are today. But so I received an invitation to speak at universities and do media events throughout Russia. So I went. Actually, when I was writing Forbidden Archaeology in the late 1980s, and the book was published in 1993, I really couldn't imagine being invited to go on a lecture tour in Russia, but it did happen. So most of the lectures went okay. But at one of the universities where I had been invited to speak by some professors there was some opposition. Some other professors in this university, it was the Tyumen State University in the city of Tyumen in Russia. These professors who opposed what I was saying went to the director of the university and got the lecture canceled. So they objected for two reasons: that I was contradicting the theory of evolution, and I was doing it from a spiritual perspective. And either one of those reasons would have been enough for them to want to cancel the lecture, but to have both of them was a real red flag for these people. So the professors who invited me tried to get the director of the university to change his mind. He wouldn't. So they went to the local branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and the director of that institution said, well, if they won't let him speak at the university, he can speak here. So the talk was arranged there. And they had buses bring students and professors from the university to this lecture. And the professors who invited me said more people came than would have come if the lecture had been held at the university as scheduled, because everyone was wondering, what is this man going to say that is so bad that the director of the university canceled this lecture? So it was really pretty interesting. Afterwards, I had a private meeting with the professors and the director of the Russian Academy of Science branch. And it was, for me, a very positive event. And actually, the next year, I went back to the same university and I spoke in the biology department there, no problem. I guess they decided if we try to cancel him or stop him, it'll just be worse for us. So better just let him speak.
What year was that, Michael?
That was around 2008.
Okay, so that's after things fought a little bit between us and them. I wish you could be there now, but unfortunately, you know what's going on. But what were you talking about that was so detrimental to the narrative that they had in place?
Well, I was, as I usually do, I gave archaeological evidence showing that human beings have been present on this planet for a very long period of time, going back many millions of years, even hundreds of millions of years, right back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth. Now, the current scientific concept is that the first human beings like us appeared on Earth less than 300,000 years ago, having evolved from more primitive ape-like ancestors. So to have evidence for human presence going back much further than that would mean we need a totally new explanation for human origins. And I think that explanation is going to involve consciousness. And most scientists today would say, well, consciousness is just a temporary byproduct of bioelectrical activity in the brain. They think that matter produces consciousness. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of evidence suggesting that consciousness has its own independent existence. And if consciousness has a source, I think it would also be conscious. So you could take it as evidence for a superior conscious being in the cosmos that has something to do with our presence here. In other words, we're not accidental beings in an accidental universe. The universe has a purpose.
Do you think that we are from here? Obviously, we've been here for a long time, but are we originally from here?
Well, if what I accept is true, and I believe it is, we are ultimately beings of pure consciousness. The body that I have now, made of the chemical elements, made of matter, is a vehicle for the conscious self within. And that's true of any material bodily vehicle. It's a vehicle for a conscious self. If you want to use religious terminology, you could call it a soul. But I don't use that term very much because if I say soul, people think, well, that requires belief, faith. I'm not into that. But if I call it a conscious self, who can deny it? Consciousness is the most real, fundamental fact of our existence. If I weren't conscious and you weren't conscious and any of our listeners or viewers weren't conscious, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It's only because we're conscious that we're aware of what's going on. So it's the most real fact of our existence. It doesn't require belief or faith. It's a fact. And that conscious self, I believe, is not from the world of matter where we find ourselves now, but from some higher level of reality, some higher dimension of the cosmos.
But those are two different things. I guess I need to rephrase what I asked. The meat suits that we wear here is one thing. Are we avatars of our consciousness, of our soul, or whatever you want to ascribe to?
I believe that our source is what I call the level of pure consciousness. But the ruling principle of that level of reality is harmonious, loving cooperation among all beings of pure consciousness. If someone has selfishness, greed, anger, they can't exist on that level. So there has to be some other place for such conscious selves to act out their desires. And that is the material level of reality, which is, you mentioned the concept of avatar. Avatar is a Sanskrit word. It means one who descends from a higher level to a lower level, comes down. That's an avatar. So yes, our position now is like we're avatars of ourselves in a virtual reality system or computer game. It's that is basically a good way to understand our current position. But it's that virtual reality system is not where we really belong. It's got a lot of detrimental aspects to it. One being that.
Want the full story? This is just part one. Now offering video interviews and discounted transcripts for members. Become a Veritas Plus member today at veritas7.com.
Our avatar, our bodily vehicle, is temporary, comes into being at a certain point in time, disintegrates at a certain point of time. And this is true of everything material, whether it's a body, an automobile, a computer, any material construction has a beginning and an end. So we ultimately belong on a level that's free of those kinds of limitations.
So you think that we're here to experience this dense 3D realm that we live in?
Yeah, and we have choices to make. Either we can consider ourselves to be machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival, individually and collectively, and we can get more and more deeply entangled in that competition, that desire to control and exploit, dominate other material beings and the material resources that are available on this level of reality. And we also have another choice: understand that we're not machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival. Rather, each one of us is a being of pure consciousness. I'm a being of pure consciousness. You're a being of pure consciousness. We're all beings of pure consciousness. There's no need to divide ourselves up on the basis of superficial considerations related to our temporary material bodily vehicles like race, gender, nationality, social status. There are all kinds of ways in which we can divide ourselves. So if we can actually understand that, what our real identity is, then we could have a different set of values and objectives in life. The main one being to develop the resource of consciousness, that we can satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, efficient, and fair way possible, while putting most of our human energy into transcending this level of reality where our consciousness is subjected to so many limitations.
And I remember our first talk, I thought it was going to be all about archaeology, but you tend to take things to the next level through consciousness. And my question to you is, and we'll get back to the main subject of the book, where does consciousness exist? Our memories. People think, they're in our brains. I would say they're everywhere. They're in every cell of the body. I've heard from people who have received organ transplants. All of a sudden, they start behaving differently. They acquire different musical taste, different food tastes. And that can only mean that our consciousness survives and lives in ourselves.
Yeah, I had a friend who had a kidney transplant, and he said the exact same thing that you're pointing out. But the stones and bones that I talk about in my books, like Extreme Human Antiquity and Forbidden Archaeology, do lead to other topics, because that what that evidence suggests is that we need new explanations for human origins. And I think those new explanations have to involve consciousness. I mean, before we even ask the question, where did human beings come from? We should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? And we should know what it is we're trying to explain. And as we look carefully at it, we'll see we're not just machines made of molecules. That's part of what we are at the present moment, matter, the chemical elements. But there's also a subtle mental body that has some very unusual powers. And then there is the actual conscious self. You know, if you want to use a computer analogy, you could say like the gross physical body is comparable to computer hardware. The subtle mental body is like the computer software that allows a user to interact with the hardware. And the conscious self actually is like the computer user, using the mind to interact with the body. So where memory actually resides, I believe, is in the subtle mental body. The mind is recording all experiences that we have, and not just in one life, but over the course of many different lives. It's acquiring knowledge, recording images, emotions, and things like that. So that is where I believe that memory resides. And some people report memories of past lives. There are scientists who have specialized in studying especially past life memories reported by young children. There was Dr. Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia Medical School in Charlottesville, Virginia. And he and his colleagues studied thousands of cases of past life memories reported by young children. And in about 800 of these cases, they were able to verify the existence of the person the child claimed to have been in the past life. So they weren't claiming to be like Cleopatra or Julius Caesar. They were claiming to be quite ordinary people who happened to have died shortly before the births of these children. And while they were still young, they retained memories of these past lives. When they grow older, it kind of fades away and their minds become occupied with other things. But there is some interesting research that suggests where memory resides is in the mental body.
Why do you think that people, and I guess I don't mean to deviate, but since you're touching the subject, as you said, I've heard so many cases of people, ordinary people, children at the age of 4 saying, I was killed by so-and-so. And you can find my body in a certain location when they find that this is a case that hadn't been resolved for months or years. And there they are. And they know exactly who did it, why, and the whole thing. Why do you think that children forget their lives? Is it because they're told, oh, you're just imagining things, you're going crazy? As they get older, they seem to forget. And maybe what they say, the biggest secret of all is the secret to our own potential. It's almost like we're told that you need to forget if you want to coexist in this world that we live in.
Well, I think we're not only told that, we experience it. As we become older, we get involved in more and more activities, and relationships that kind of take the forefront of our experience of ourselves, and these other things get pushed into the background. Because if they weren't put into the background, we wouldn't be able to function. If I'm all the time caught up in very detailed memories of my past existence, then it would affect the way that I act in this lifetime, in this embodiment. So I think it's sort of natural, like we might have dreams at night, but if we were absorbed in the imagery of the dream during the daytime when we're supposed to be working, interacting with relatives, colleagues, and others, it really wouldn't work out so well. But nevertheless, there are people who do report these things.
Let's talk about your pseudonym, in a way, the forbidden archaeologist. That label itself sounds like something hidden away. Why do you think mainstream science fears your work?
I don't know if they all fear it, but some of them certainly don't like it. Basically, I found three reactions from scientists, in particular archaeologists, to my work. One group of scientists I call the fundamentalist materialists. They are committed to the current theories, which are based on this exclusive materialism, not for really scientific reasons, but more for ideological reasons. They either have some prior commitment to atheism or some prior commitment to a strict, exclusive material picture of reality, and that informs how they react to different categories of evidence that come to their attention. And as far as my work goes, they don't want to hear about it. They don't want anyone else to hear about it. They would be the types who would try to cancel lectures, for example. There's a second group of scientists who accept the current theories, but for more or less scientific reasons. It just seems they believe that on the basis of what they know, what they've been taught, that the current theories seem to offer the best explanations for the evidence. But they're willing to listen to alternatives. And it is scientists in that group who have written reviews of my books that recognize positive elements in them. For example, there was a historian of science, David Oldroyd, a very prominent historian of science, specializing in the sciences related to human origins. He and a colleague wrote a 23-page review article about forbidden archaeology in a journal called Social Studies of Science. And that was kind of unusual, because usually when a scientific journal reviews a book, it's a couple of paragraphs, but they wrote 23 pages. And they asked the question, does this work, forbidden archaeology, make a contribution to the literature on paleoanthropology? That's a term for the science of human origins. And they said yes, for two reasons. First of all, they said, we, as professional historians of science, we can think of no other book that has gone into the history of archaeology in such depth before. So they thought that made a positive contribution. And second, they said, the book raises important questions about the nature of scientific truth claims. In other words, scientists attach different levels of certainty to their theories, and their theory of human evolution is one that they attach a very high level of certainty to. And the authors of this review, David Oldroyd and his colleague Joe Wodak, said, in light of the evidence,
17 seasons of uncensored interviews. While you're hearing part 1 with ads, Veritas Plus members get part 2 immediately, plus video interviews and discounted transcripts. Become a Veritas Plus member today at veritas7.com.
presented in this book, perhaps scientists should take it down a notch, the level of certainty that they attach to their current theories. So it's scientists in that category who are willing and open-minded enough to listen to an alternative presentation and take it seriously, that have invited me to speak at their universities, accepted proposals that I've made to present papers at their international scientific gatherings, have invited me to speak at leading scientific institutions around the world. So that they don't necessarily agree with me in every respect, but they can see this is something that needs to be considered. The third group is those who actually totally agree with me, which is a very small group, and sometimes they're not able to say so openly. So those are the kinds of reactions that I've gotten. So it isn't totally negative. There is a lot of negativity from the first group. They're the ones who will cancel the lectures, write very abusive articles, and not in generally the professional scientific literature, but in interest group publications like skeptics journals, the Journal of the National Committee for Science Education, which is not a national group. It's not a government group. It's just a private interest group dedicated to opposing anything that challenges the current theories of the evolution of life.
It reminds me of Nick Pope's wife, Professor Elizabeth, I forget her last name, but she's really fighting academia because she's been terminated by saying there are only, for example, in the skeleton, she can say, oh, this is the skeleton of a woman and this is the skeleton of a man. And she's been told that she cannot talk about that. And, when it comes to science, shouldn't we just report the truth, observe, replicate, and disseminate the information as it is?
Yes, I think people should be, especially in the sciences, should be aware of the entire data set that's relevant to their field of study, even if it doesn't appear to fit within the current paradigm. Once I was speaking at a university in Amsterdam, Holland, the Netherlands, and my audience was graduate students of archaeology, geology, and paleontology. And I actually gave them that same message, that they should be aware of the entire data set that's relevant to their field of study, because something that doesn't fit at the present moment may fit in the light of future discoveries. But if you've excluded it, if you've kind of cast it into oblivion, then you don't have it available when you need it. So I think it's the same with skeletal evidence for humans, whether it's determining their gender or their species. There are some scientists who will try to define what is an anatomically modern human skull, for example. And sometimes they try to define it in terms of having a high forehead with no eyebrow ridges, a chin, a developed chin. And they say if you don't have a developed chin and you have a low forehead, then you're not human. You're not anatomically modern human. But there are living populations of humans, Homo sapiens, who are recognized as members of the human species today, who have those features, that some scientists would consider making you not human, but some other type of hominid like Neanderthal or Denisovan. So I think there shouldn't be any censorship if things are going to be judged. It should be on the basis of persuasion. Now, in the case that you mentioned, I'm not totally familiar with the details, only with what you said, but I think it's perfectly all right if somebody, for some reason, disagrees with the professor's analysis, but I don't think she should be censored in any way or told she can't do that.
She was told because the remains are not alive to be able to say what identity they had. That's how absurd it is. By the way, it's Professor Elizabeth Weiss. And for anybody that wants to listen to her show, it's Bones of Contention, Science, Censorship, and the Battle over Our Ancient Heritage. But I'm not sure if this area is an area of expertise of yours, but you've heard about the elongated skulls, the Paracas skulls. What is your opinion of those?
Yeah, I've heard of those. There's a researcher who specializes in them.
Brian Forster.
Brian Forster, who I've met a few times. For me, it's, a lot of my work has been inspired by my studies in the Puranas, which are the historical and cosmological writings of ancient Indian thought. And they tell us that there are 400,000 human-like species scattered throughout the universe. So I'm prepared, and even today scientists are prepared to accept new species coexisting with anatomically modern humans at different points in history. That wasn't a very common idea when I published Forbidden Archaeology first time in 1993. But they had a very linear concept of human evolution with only one hominid species existing at a time. Now they've come to a view that has the coexistence of anatomically modern humans with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other species that are coming to light. Homo naledi from South Africa.
Homo floresiensis.
Homo floresiensis from Flores Island in Indonesia. So you've got a whole group of them, and it may be that these elongated skull from Peru are part of that diversity. Of course, one idea is that there are anatomically modern humans that have used pressure and wrappings to get the skull to take a particular shape, when the bones are still plastic at a very young age. So that's one explanation that's given. Some would propose, well, they're just another species to add into the mix, and some would say they have an extraterrestrial origin.
I know that some have done that, binding to shape the skull. Maybe they're trying to mimic or to emulate another species. I believe, based on the evidence that I've seen, that they were their own. The question is, you mentioned a few of them, the Denisovans, the Homo floresiensis, and the little people in Indonesia. What happened to them that there's not a single one that we know of that is alive?
Well, I think that's a good question. It takes us into an area that's sometimes called cryptozoology, which has to do with observations of animals that are thought not to exist anymore, but which have been observed by some people. And that takes you into, of course, there are many different species in which there are these anomalies that come up, that there are observations of them, like, fish that are thought to have gone extinct hundreds of millions of years ago, but still exist, like the coelacanth and others. But as far as human beings go, in cryptozoology, there's attention given to evidence for living ape men, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Almas in Central Asia, orang pendek in Indonesia or Borneo. There are different parts of the world where people report sightings of beings resembling the larger hominids, larger human-like hominids, and smaller ones as well, like Homo floresiensis, sometimes called the hobbit by scientists, is a very short creature, small. And then you have reports of other types of beings who are quite large, in terms of the evidence from the fossil record. But there have been sightings of living examples of both the smaller types of hominins, like Homo floresiensis, and larger ones.
Yeah, giants.
Well, like the Bigfoot or Sasquatch individuals.
Well, that's another thing. But based on the evidence and the people that I've interviewed, Catalina Island has stories of giant bones being found, and it's always the same suspects. The Smithsonian comes along, takes them, disappears them.
Yeah. There are numerous reports of large-sized human skeletal remains having been found. Now, it depends upon what you consider to be giant. Some of the reports are of human beings 7 feet tall. Well, to me, that is, there are living human beings, many of them, who are that tall. Many of them play on the NBA teams. there are even a few people living today who are 8 feet tall. I think there was a man in Mongolia who I've seen reports about who was maybe 9 feet tall, but there's nobody 10 feet tall or higher.
But
than
we're told that that's gigantism. It's a disease. Could we maybe pinpoint that at one time in our history we had beings that were, tall? As you said, if it's 7 feet tall, we have 7 feet tall basketball players. That's normal to some people. But I remember in the early 2000s when I started this program, one of our listeners from Iran, his father sent him some images he sent to me after an earthquake there. An area was unearthed, almost like a city, and they found female skeletal remains of females that had a glass eye, and they were in average between 9 and 12 feet tall. To me, those are giants.
Yeah, that would qualify.
Loving this interview? We have 17 seasons of content just like this, plus part 2 of every episode, all ad-free for Veritas Plus members. Become a member today at veritas7.com.
As giant. In terms of the evidence that I deal with in my books, I've been able to go into museums. I mean, these objects may not be on display, but I've been able to track them down in many cases and study them and photograph them. These reports of evidence for large-sized human skeletal remains, up to this time, I haven't been able to verify the existence of any of them. Now, I accept, that in the past, large-sized human beings, giants, did exist. And it's even just part of ordinary science that before 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, most living things were bigger than they are today. I mean, I live in California. You've got in the Sierra Nevada mountains, the
trees,
California redwood trees, that are absolutely huge, hundreds of feet high. They're actually the largest living things on Earth. I think they're holdovers from a previous age when the bears were bigger, the elephants were bigger, most plants and animals were bigger than they are today. So I kind of accept the idea that there were giants. The most convincing reports, among the most convincing reports that I've seen, were discoveries that were made at a place called Castelnau in France, Castlenau. The reports tell of a French archaeologist or anthropologist who discovered bones at this site. Not complete human skeletons, but human femurs or thigh bones and humeri, upper arm bones. Now, if anthropologists have a femur of a certain length, they can tell you how tall the person would have been who had a femur like that. So the calculations revealed that the being that had a femur of the size of the one found at this Castelnau site would have been 11 feet tall or higher. So, I think there were photographs of the bone published in a scientific journal in the early 20th century. So I think that's one of the best documented cases that I've seen. Also, once I went to New Zealand, to Auckland, somebody there, some businessman, he liked my work and he arranged for me to give some lectures in New Zealand. So I went there, And he met me at the airport and he said, tomorrow we're going to see something very interesting. A friend of mine since childhood is working at the Museum of Natural History in Auckland here, and he's going to show us the skeletal remains of a human being 10 feet tall from a Pacific island. So I thought, okay, finally, I'm going to see some of these actual human skeletal remains that you would have to say belong to a giant. So we went the next morning, this gentleman and I, and his friend met us at the museum and started taking us around. Here are the dinosaur bones, here are these specimens. And finally, we kind of asked, well, what about the large size human skeletal remains? And he said, I'm sorry, we can't see them. And I had to think, well, what happened that the 24 hours earlier, this man had told his friend since childhood that he was going to show us these skeletal remains, and then when we got there, he didn't. All I can think of, and this is a speculation, I don't have any proof of it, but all I can think of is that at some point that morning, he must have mentioned to his colleagues what he was going to do. And they told him, no, don't do that. And separate from that, I had learned from newspaper reports in New Zealand that an archaeological site in New Zealand had been embargoed, closed to the public, and all evidence all the reports of the excavations were being kept secret for 50 years. And I mentioned that to the museum officials that we were talking to, and they said, well, I wish they hadn't do that because now people think something's being hidden. So it appears that there is some kind of what I call knowledge filtration going on.
That was my next question. What do you really mean when you say knowledge filtration? It almost sounds like a filter that decides what counts as quote unquote real science. How does this hidden process actually work?
Well, it's not a concept that's original with me. It's something that scientists and historians of science and philosophers of science have understood for a long time, namely that theoretical preconceptions can influence how scientists treat various categories of evidence that come to their attention. One of these philosophers of science is Thomas Kuhn, who wrote an influential book called The Study of Scientific Revolutions. And he's the one who proposed or popularized the term paradigm and paradigm shift and terminology like that. So a paradigm, what is that? Well, it's a set of ideas and practices and conclusions that a scientific discipline has. It is their way of saying, well, this is what our discipline is about. This is our methodology. This is these are the conclusions that we've reached. And the work of normal science is to operate within that paradigm. Now, he pointed out that occasionally scientists will encounter evidence that doesn't fit the paradigm. And technically, those are called anomalies. And, they don't think that by ignoring these anomalies, they are doing anything wrong. They just think they're being responsible scientists. They don't think they're concealing evidence, which if people knew about would cause them to disbelieve in their theories. They're just thinking, okay, I don't have time to figure this one out. Somebody will deal with it in the future. Maybe my colleague down the hall could have a look at it. I'm sure he'd be able to explain it. And meanwhile, I'm busy applying for my grants. I've got courses to teach and graduate students to supervise, and I'm planning my next expedition. So they just kind of set it aside, let it be forgotten. I'm not denying that in some cases there is what I would call active suppression of evidence, but in many cases it's just the scientists operating according to their paradigm and not really considering it as anything wrong. But when the anomalies begin to pile up, so there's not just a few of them, but there's a lot of them, this may provoke a paradigm shift. So that's what I'm trying to do with my work, is point out that the anomalies are not just a few isolated examples. The anomalies that contradict the paradigm are numerous, enough to fill up books hundreds of pages long.
Very interesting, because what you just said about the museum, that we're going to show you some bones, that happens time and time again. I'm going to tell a story that I have said maybe a few times here, but I had a friend who left the United States. He was a law enforcement whistleblower and went to live escaping basically, in El Salvador at the beginning of the 2000s. And he kept calling me all the time saying that he befriended the curator, the director of the El Salvador National History Museum, and that she was listening to our podcast. Maybe she listened to you and said, hey, I'd like to talk to him. So we arranged an interview. The day of the interview, she did not show up. In fact, he went there to the museum, and what he found, Michael, was that the museum was cordoned off by UNESCO, and she was never found again. She disappeared. What was she about to tell us? We have no idea, but it makes you ponder, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I've encountered similar cases with scientists that I've known personally, like Virginia Steen McIntyre, an American geologist. In the 1970s, she was called down to Mexico to a site called Coyatlaco in central Mexico near the town of Puebla. And there, a team of American and Mexican archaeologists had discovered stone tools and weapons in an excavation, and they wanted to know how old the site was. So Virginia Steen McIntyre and colleagues from the United States Geological Survey went down there, and they used 4 different scientific methods, including the uranium series method, zircon fission track method, a couple of others, to date the site. And they got an age of 300,000 years. Now, the accepted idea in archaeological circles is no human beings came into the Americas any earlier than about 20 or 25,000 years ago. So to have this evidence showing a human presence at 300,000 years was just absurd, according to the archaeologists. So they refused to publish the age for the site given by their own handpicked team of geologists. So Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues decided to independently publish the age for the site. And when they did that, they experienced an extreme negative backlash from their colleagues in the scientific world. And especially it affected Virginia Steen McIntyre. She lost a position that she held at a university in the United States. Although she had been a rising star in her profession, her opportunities for advancement were suddenly blocked. She was labeled as a maverick and a troublemaker. So those are the kinds of things that can happen to someone who steps outside the paradigm or thinks outside the box. Once I was giving a lecture at a university in South Africa, and the students were on vacation at that time, so my audience was scientists and from different departments of the university. So I gave a talk about forbidden archaeology and talked about this knowledge filtering process. So afterwards, I was kind of standing in the lobby, and one of the professors kind of walks up to me, looks around, and then says to me quietly, Mr. Cremo, this phenomenon of knowledge filtration that you talked about, it's operating in my discipline, chemistry, as well. And he kind of explained it, went away. And then another professor comes up to me and said, Mr. Cremo, this knowledge filtering process, it's operating in my discipline, physics. So about 3 or 4 different professors came up to me and told me the same thing. So it's, as I said, it's not an idea that I've invented. It's been understood for a long time by scientists themselves and those who study science, like historians of science and philosophers of science.
This is a prime example. I mean, what did you say? 250,000 years plus, not only the tools, but the vertebrae that she found. So this is, to you, you think this is deliberate knowledge filtration?
In this case, I would say yes. And what happened after that is that the site was closed down and something was built over it. So, I mean, you get things like that happen.
That's what happens all the time. And before we break, I'll just tell you this. I think I told you this before. But when I was working in Mexico in the early 90s, every weekend I would go to every site that I could find. So I went to I believe it was the cathedral. And right next to it, they had some tents, and they were totally closed off. But of course, I'm nosy. So I tried to open, and I saw inside, and there were some, yellow helmets digging. And, sir, you can't come in here. So there was an American person there. And I said, can he talk to you for a moment? Well, what is this? Like, we're not supposed to talk about it. But, this church was built over a temple, a Mayan temple or whatever it was. But we're not supposed to talk about it. Can you please leave? That was the first time when I realized that most of the churches in Latin America are built over something else. And who knows if the Incas, the Mayas, the Aztecs also built something on top of something older than that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that often happens, that on sites that may be very ancient, new construction is done. I mean, it's interesting, most of these temple structures, whether they're more recent or more modern, are aligned in a certain way. Mostly they've been aligned in the cardinal directions, pointing to the north geographic pole. And sometimes the position of the geographic North Pole shifts, it moves. So some of the buildings, structures that are built upon older structures are not exactly oriented to today's geographic North Pole, but to a position it was in thousands of years ago. So there are some researchers who specialize in studying the orientations of such structures. And I mean, it's something new to me. It's something I've only begun to consider in the past year or two. But I think there is some validity to the idea that the differences in orientation can be correlated with positions of the North Geographic Pole in the past, going back quite far in time.
Isn't that better than carbon-14 or other aging, modalities? If we can actually determine, because you see a lot of the airports have to repaint the number, landing in runway, whatever, and they always have to change it after a few years because it's always moving. So if we can go back in time and determine when that position was truly north, that's even better than what we have right now, isn't it?
Some ways, yes. But you're right to point out the limitations of carbon dating. Carbon dating is based on the idea that there are two types of carbon in a living organism, like a human being. We've got carbon-14 and carbon-12. The carbon-14 is radioactive, which means it decays into other elements at a certain rate called the half-life. And the half-life of carbon-14 is about 5,000 years, roughly. So that means when an organism dies, you've got a certain ratio of carbon-12 to 14. And the carbon-12 amount will stay the same, but the carbon-14 will decrease by half every 5,000 years. And by the time you get back to about 20 half-lives, or about 100,000 years, there's nothing left to measure. So that means the absolute maximum age you can get by carbon dating is 100,000 years.
Oh, wow.
But most of it comes in, like you say, the 50,000 year range. And that's what it's generally used for. But the problem is that, say if I have a...
Well, hold it right there, Michael, because we have to break. That's a good cliffhanger. This is a great topic. How can people buy your new book, the name, and how to get it better, from your website or from Amazon?
Well, at the present moment, there's some difficulty with Amazon. All the rest of my books are available on Amazon. But this new one, Extreme Human Antiquity, there's a little glitch in the supply chain we're trying to work out. So at the present moment, the best place to get a copy of Extreme Human Antiquity would be the website, extremehumanantiquity.com. No spaces in it. extremehumanantiquity.com. Or alternatively, my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com.
So to get his book and to avoid some knowledge filtration, delivery filtration, go to the website. But one more hour to come with Michael Cremo. This is Mel, and you are listening to VERITAS. Don't go anywhere. Here's a track from Truth Frequency. You won't hear anywhere else. If you like what you hear, you can get the full track at VERITAS7.com on the page for today's guest. Thank you for listening to the first part of this important Veritas episode. To hear the rest and access all of our exclusive content, head over to the Veritas Plus member section or click the subscribe button at Veritas7.com. While you're there, don't forget to visit the Veritas store, featuring a range of great products, including Focus Life Force Energy, Experience the benefits with a 15-day free trial of FLFE. No credit card required. Want to get in touch? Be a guest on the program? Suggest someone or share feedback? Just click the contact button at veritas7.com. Thank you for listening to Veritas, because you don't want to believe, you want to know.